Hey everybody, just to set the stage, this video was recorded last year in Portugal and was recorded in person, so please keep that context in mind on the timing of certain things we talk about.
Absolutely. And so you're talking about privacy in Monero. So why don't we just start with this, because our community is very privacy and security focused, not necessarily cryptocurrency focused. I love that. And so I think probably a big question people are going to have right off the bat for you then is, why Monero? Because I think a lot of people believe, especially even maybe in our community, that Bitcoin might be private enough. So what drew you to Monero specifically, and why would you recommend Monero as a privacy tool, and not Zcash or any of these other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I think it's tricky to walk through all the different cryptocurrencies and all the things that they promise. So a lot of times people take one of two routes. They either just latch on to one cryptocurrency, usually that's something like Bitcoin that's well known, well understood, and just ignore everything else, or they just kind of toss out the baby with the bathwater with the cryptocurrency and see all of the scams and problematic projects and false marketing and all the things that go on that are problematic, and just get rid of everything. But why I focus on Monero as someone who I've spent a lot of time in the cryptocurrency world, but I don't really like the cryptocurrency world. Like it's not a space I enjoy being in much of the time. But I think it's an immensely valuable one for some of the reasons I mentioned just a minute ago. But Monero specifically, why I think it's an immensely powerful tool is because it makes financial privacy and financial self-sovereignty very approachable. So just like a lot of the privacy tools that we know and love, things like Proton Mail, things like Signal, things that you can switch to using those instead of a surveilled, centrally controlled system. You can switch to using things like Proton Mail and Signal with very little loss to convenience, but you get strong default privacy guarantees with tools like those. And I really view Monero as a similar tool where you don't need to understand how cryptocurrencies work. You don't need to understand how privacy on a blockchain works. You don't need to understand deeply network level anonymity or any of these things to be able to use Monero and gain strong financial privacy. Just like when you onboard your grandma to Signal, you're not explaining to her how triple ratchet encryption works. Like she doesn't need to know that. It doesn't matter. And Monero is really that for me in the cryptocurrency space, where I can feel, especially as somebody who puts out pro-privacy education and who people look to for advice around these things, I want to only advise people use things that will protect them well by default. Even if they have no idea what they're doing, even if they make mistakes, I want it to do the best possible job to protect them. So Monero does a very good job at that. And other things like Bitcoin or Zcash, they don't. They really allow users to shoot themselves in the foot. They have poor privacy defaults. A recent analogy, which isn't perfect, but one I've kind of been thinking over recently, is that like Monero is kind of like Signal.
You serious?
I love that, and I think a lot of people in our community are gonna also really agree with you there on how like the defaults are so important for them as well as the people around them, because then they don't need to even understand what the tool does. And so that's something we push for as well, and I think that it's excellent that that's one of the core reasons why Monero is such a useful tool. One question that I guess is more critical on my end, and I'm sure a lot of people ask the same thing, is why does it need to be cryptocurrency? So what is there a way for us to have the benefits of Monero without cryptocurrency? And I guess where does that fit into things? Like explain to someone like myself who I guess I've just kind of learned to accept that, yes, this is the way you have to get financial privacy, but is there a way to do it without cryptocurrency, and why is the blockchain a part of all of this? Why is it part of this discussion?
That's a really good question. I honestly haven't really considered that before, but I think the reason why I see something like Monero specifically as a cryptocurrency being important as opposed to other ways to gain financial privacy, well, I guess let's step back. So, like, I consider cash a very, very useful tool for privacy. Yes, it has some potential issues with if your money's inflating or other things like that, where you have problems with the money behind it, but the actual tool of cash is a useful tool for privacy. But the problem is cash is not only going away, countries are trying to get rid of it as soon as they can. It's getting harder to use it. More and more merchants aren't accepting it. And obviously, if you want to buy something on Amazon, you're not going to ship them an envelope stuffed with $500 in cash. Like you need to pay them digitally. And much of our commerce, much of the things we buy and sell happen online. So we need a tool that can enable payments that can't be easily surveilled. It could work, but the problem is we're not in a society where privacy is valued or widely accepted, and we're currently really in a war on privacy.
It would be a really cool experiment to see what a community online would look like with real identified people. And this is obviously like a very opposite thing for what I would want from a privacy perspective. But theoretically, let's say it was not privacy invasive. Everything you posted was on your own dime, right? Like you post it. There's no data collection outside of what you post. Let's say this was like IRL verified. Let's say you have to set up, like I set up an office outside my house. People come here in person. I look at their ID. I give them a YubiKey that gives them access to their account, that gives them a permanent name attached to their YubiKey. And that's the only way they can log into that account. They can't change their name. They can't change anything. It doesn't include an age. It just has a first and last name. And we can also hook it up with like mutual friends. You have to bring 2 friends along. So like it's a party thing. So like no matter what, you have some kind of like pressure, social pressure to like have to be a somewhat decent human being. It's dystopian. It's super dystopian. Like I know it's dystopian. I just think it's an interesting thought experiment to see what that would look like. And I think it demonstrates just the bad side of anonymity on the internet, which overall I think is a net good. But yeah.
Yeah. And there are other, like I'm focusing there on the benefits to it as a tool for payments, but there are also other economic and monetary benefits to doing it in a decentralized way.
Well, why don't we cover those? Because I don't really know much of those.
Yeah, so, and this kind of boils down to a lot of like the reason that Bitcoin was created. And there's a lot in common between Monero and Bitcoin and in these ways, but ultimately that decentralization also means that there's no central party who can just decide to print 1 billion Monero tomorrow. They can't just wake up and say, I want to have all this Monero for myself, or I want to just flood this onto the market to reduce the value or anything like that. There's no ability for a single person or entity to control the monetary supply. So we can avoid things like the inflation that we're seeing today, where it's rampant across the world, and it's because of the things that central entities like the Fed and the U.S. have chosen to do to try to push the economy the way they wanted to push it. Obviously, I don't think they wanted hyperinflation, but they've been messing with the monetary supply, and it can have effects like this, like the things that we're seeing today. So when you decentralize it, you allow building this social consensus and then building it in a technical level where, like for Monero, there's only 18.4 million Monero initially, and then from now on, and we actually just hit this point called the tail emission, which we won't dive into today, but from now on, for every minute of Monero's existence, there will be 0.3 Monero emitted, and that's to help secure the network. Again, there's a lot more we could get into there, but that means that I can know for sure that the Monero that I may or may not have is X percent of Monero supply until year 2040 or whatever I want to say. And that lets me have faith that the value of my Monero and the purchasing power is not something that can be stolen by a central entity through issuance or inflation or something like that. So those are some of the economic benefits. And then, like you mentioned, I think another key one that I didn't touch on much, but you mentioned is censorship. It's censorship resistance. So there's no central party that can decide, I don't want Seth for Privacy transacting on Monero, so he's banned and he can't do this. No one has that control, no one within Monero, no central entity.
So how about like actual get started steps? Like right now, someone's listening to this and they want to open a new browser tab while this episode is still running. How are they going to do that?
I think a lot of people should start on mobile because it's often the kind of most user-friendly approach. And that could be using something like Cake Wallet, and that's in both app stores, iOS and Android, and you can just install it. It has a very simple user interface.
What eventually led to you developing your blog and then eventually your podcast? So Seth has, and I'm sure you can talk about this more yourself too, but he has an opt-out podcast, and he actually invited me on there, and I'm the first interview he had on the podcast. So do you mind talking about the blog, the podcast, and your journey in becoming an educator?
Yeah, I mean, the blog, which is sethforprivacy.com, if anyone wants to read that. The blog ultimately started just out of being very tired of making Twitter threads and wanting to do things a little bit more long form with
candy points.
Yeah. Exactly. Very tired of that, and like I try to be a very nuanced and detailed person, so when I look into something, I'm not just going to share a very high-level overview. Like I want to break down all of the nitty-gritty details.
A couple quick updates on last week's podcast. So we explained biometrics versus passcodes in relation to a story about a shoulder surfing attack. We explained that biometrics are a good protection against shoulder surfing attacks. Some of you, rightfully so, stepped in and said, but biometrics have these problems. And those are very true. We could have done a better job of outlining this, but a lot of times when we cover mitigations to specific stories, we're covering mitigations for those specific stories. If we add several layers of nuance to each story, it's gonna make this podcast really long.
I love all of it. I think that what you're doing is awesome too, and the interviews that you do are just so well done. I don't know if people tell you that, but you're a good interviewer. And for those listening, he's interviewed some like really big people in the space too. And so if you're interested in seeing some really cool interviews from some of like the services you probably all use, check out the Opt Out podcast because he has some really great interviews there from some great people. And I guess is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we start winding things down?
Just a constant thing that I run into in the privacy space is just the people who do wake up feel very swamped with like, I have no clue where to start. Like it just feels overwhelming. And I think like you do a great job within Techlore, but
You serious?
maybe just a reminder that when you see these issues and you see this need in your own personal life or the lives of your family or friends, take it slow. Like take your time, preserve your mental health, take things one step at a time, and make sure that it's not something you just dive into head first. I mean, the same applies for Monero as well, in that it can be very both time consuming and just mentally taxing to dive into the whole cryptocurrency space and all the things happening there. And taking it slowly and just starting very simply has been very helpful for me, and I think has helped a lot of other people be able to create a sustainable journey towards personal privacy and not burn out very quickly.
Love it. Yep, we always say privacy's a journey. It's not a weekend hobby. So I love that that's your approach too.